Motoring 2008 on TSN is brought to you by the new Q horsepower from Quaker State. Unleash all your horses. And Michelin, a better way forward.
Well, you know, I've said many times on Motoring what a big fan I am of Porsches. That is until the Audi R8 came along. Just kidding, but it's one heck of a vehicle, that R8. But what is it about Porsche? Well, I've always felt that Porsches are simply the epitome of the classic sports car. Well, this week, we're at the site of maybe the most prestigious sports car race in North America. 12 hours at Sebring. And Porsche has selected this site to take a walk down memory lane, because it was back in 1960 that Porsche won its very first endurance race. They did it here at Sebring. They did it in the RS60 Spyder, and they beat out Ferrari, they beat out Peugeot. In fact, Porsche was dubbed the Giant Killer. Well, at this year's Sebring race, Porsche decided to unveil a tribute to that year, 1960, by bringing out a limited edition Boxster RS60 Spyder. How limited? Well, the race that they won was in 1960, and they're going to offer 1,960 Spyders.
People tend to lose track of what Porsche is, and particularly where Porsche came from. Because Porsche has been a manufacturer that ever since they started building cars, they started building sports cars. And in order to promote their sports cars, you try to show that they are capable and do things better than the competition. Yeah? So you end up inevitably going racing. We call the Porsche DNA, which means showing to yourself and to the competition that you might have an edge on them, goes from 1948 up to 2008. Now being here in Sebring was a very apt moment. We have the new Boxster RS60 to launch and show to the American public for the first time. But it just so happened that about in 1960, the original RS60, which is probably the most powerful mid-engine race car we had at that time, won for the first time overall the Sebring 12 Hours.
The Boxster is a mid-engine, two-seat roadster. It had a heritage connection to Porsche's early cars, some of its sexiest cars, but it also had an engineering legitimacy that the front-engine cars didn't, in terms of there is no better location for the engine in a sports car than in the middle. And that's why you see the best race cars here today. None of the top-class cars are anything other than a mid-engine car, and that's what a Boxster is, and that's what Porsche's best top racing cars always have been. RS stands for Rennsport, which is German for race sport, and Rennsport has traditionally meant lightweight and obviously race-oriented. And Porsche has been very careful with its use of that term. RS has only been applied to 911s in the last 30, 40 years. Now it's on a Boxster, and there's going to be some people who are going to have problems with that. But on the other hand, the car does have a little more power, it does have different suspension. It's not just a special edition of paint and stickers. It's a special car, much more so than some of the special editions we've seen over the years. I'll be curious to see how it's received.
It's interesting where the RS60 Boxster fits into the Porsche family, because my personal opinion, and a lot of people feel like the Boxster was sort of introduced as an entry level, a more attainable type of Porsche for a market that maybe normally wouldn't buy a 911. So to have this limited edition Boxster, I think, is a wonderful thing. I think for me it sort of raises the bar. With my perception of the Boxster, everybody thinks, oh, it's the little base model that you get when you can't afford the 911 or whatever. But I think it's very nice that they're doing the comparison to the old RS60 with the Boxster, sort of building on Porsche's heritage. I think one thing that's really nice to see is Porsche really emphasizing its participation in motorsports. And especially at a time when a lot of brands are sort of going away and sort of leaving their hardcore kind of enthusiast type audience, or at least seem to be, for the more luxury type of style on their consumer cars. So I think they walk a very fine line between the best of both worlds, between having the luxury and the comfort, but also having the performance and building on that race heritage.
You know, Porsche's been in the newspapers this past year, but mostly on the business page. I mean, sales are going great. They're thinking of swallowing up Volkswagen, but they want everybody to know that despite the fact that they're actually building SUVs, Porsche has not lost its passion and its desire to win here at the racetrack.
We hope to prove here, both on the track with our new RS Spyders, but also with this, what's probably the purest of our sports cars in our lineup these days, the Boxster, because it is basically derived from a purebred race car. That we wanted to show that basically, whether it's now 50 years ago or to this day, the people that dream up, that design, that build Porsches are as passionate and as competitive as ever.
I have a confession to make. I've been to the dark side, but I have come back. More later on Kenzie's Corner.
It's 240 millimeters longer. That means it's bigger, but is it better? This week on Test Drive, the Mini Clubman. I expected the Clubman to be a watered-down version of a very likeable car. It's not. There is, however, one piece of advice. If you're contemplating a Clubman purchase, opt for the double moonroof. The front panel tilts and slides, the rear one lifts. It opens up the cabin enormously, which eliminates the claustrophobic feel the low-slung roof and narrow side glass might otherwise impart. The Clubman is still very much a driver's car. Combine these body-hugging seats with the tilt and telescopic steering wheel adjustment and you can find the right driving position very easily. All the information, it's relayed back to the driver with accuracy. The one thing I don't care for, there's just too many buttons stuck all over the place. And by the way, if you like circles, you'll love the Clubman. Where the Clubman really surprises is that the stretch platform matters not a whit when it comes to the handling. The base Mini is famous for its go-kart-like handling. The Clubman is that and so much more. To begin with, there's less pitching on rough roads, and so the Clubman's demeanour has a more dialed-in feel altogether. Factor in the steering feel, optional sport suspension and 205 45R17 tyres and you have a ride that devoured the pylon test. Of course, the fact the ride quality is plusher, well, it's an added bonus. To sit in the back of the base car, you had to be somewhat of a yoga practitioner just to find the seat. In this Clubman, the 80mm stretch in the wheelbase brings plenty of legroom and lots of headroom as long as the guy up front shares it. The bottom line, you can actually go for a long trip sitting in the back of this car without ending up like a pretzel. The 1.6-litre turbocharged 4 is a sweet little mill that loves to rev, and it does so with a willing eagerness. With all the extra sheet metal mandated by the stretch, I expected the launch to be less enthusiastic and the top end somewhat lazier. Neither is the case. The 172 horses run the Clubman to 100 km an hour in 7.4 seconds, which is just 0.2 slower than its stunted sibling. This speaks to the energy the turbocharger adds to the engine, especially when the sport mode is engaged. It not only ramps up throttle response, it brings 192 pound-feet of torque when the engine goes into its overboost mode. The stretch to the back end of the Clubman also works wonders when it comes to storage. With the seats up, you get about 9 cubic feet, fold them down and that number grows to 32 cubic feet. You'll also find underfloor storage, a privacy cover, and when you close these barn doors up, the needed wash wipers to keep the rear windows clean. The problem with the whole lot? What you do not see through the rear view mirror. The 6-speed manual gearbox is great. The gate is defined, the throws are short, and the ratios perfectly match to the engine's character. Similarly, the clutch pedal is feather light and the bite point is in the perfect place. Finally, the anti-lock brakes are just fine, yielding an average stopping distance of 39.1 metres. And the electronic stability nanny, well, it actually stays out until the car begins to break away. Thank you very much. I came into this test drive expecting the Clubman to have lost some of its go-kart-like characteristics. It turns out that the stretch in the wheelbase and overall length do absolutely nothing to the handling. This thing still handles like the dickens. And if you go with the Cooper S, well, it's got plenty of punch. The upside, you've now got a usable back seat and some much-needed cargo space. The bottom line, it works.
Just ran out of gas, 653 kilometers, and about 127 kilometers after the light came on. Just all of a sudden lost power, all the lights are on, and we're finished.
They've all got 50 liters of fuel in them, and the idea is to see how far they can go. It is an economical category of vehicles to begin with, but nonetheless there's variations within the category. We'd like to see if you put all of these cars on the same route, on the same day, which one's going to last the longest.
And that's it. There's no more on the gas pedal. Oh, there it caught for a second, it downshifted. No, we're not going to make it any further.
How many kilometers?
It's 674 kilometers.
The reason why we've done this is because a compact car represents an alternative to families. These cars seat 5 people, they hold lots of luggage. We think that this is the most fuel-efficient car in Canada available for Canadians, and also at a price that most Canadians can afford, under $20,000.
Make sure you check out Motoring's brand new website. Miss an episode or segment on TSN? Well, you can now watch it on the web. We also have a buyer's guide, Car of the Year poll, a photo gallery, the latest news, and much more. And it's all at motoringtv.com.
You know, a lot of future technology is being demonstrated here at Sebring, but they always have time to look back at the past with a vintage race. And I know what you're saying, boy, they sure don't make them like that anymore, but hello, if you've driven today's cars and you've driven those cars, maybe it's just as well. All right, let's head to the Quaker State Garage and join Bill Gardiner.
You got that right, Brad. You know, with the exception of the fact that those older cars were so easy to work on, that's probably the thing that I miss the most. But when you think about it, those old cars, especially the ones you're looking at on the track in Sebring that are all juiced up for track performance. I mean, they're going to handle great, like race car handling, but it'll be a punishing ride, you can be sure. And that's how the old performance cars were. You always sacrifice something to gain something. But it seems now that manufacturers have been able to find the best of both worlds. Race car handling, luxury car ride. Perfect example, this Infiniti G35 behind me. Great handling and great ride in one package. How do they do that? Well, there's a number of ways that manufacturers have been able to achieve that, and they've worked towards that slowly over the years. One of the first things that manufacturers started to do years ago was come out with aluminum wheels. Now, aluminum wheels are almost standard on most cars right now, but what aluminum wheels do is remove a lot of unsprung weight. This wheel tire assembly on this Infiniti is quite light compared to an older car that would have had a steel rim. Now, when I talk about unsprung weight, that's all the components in the suspension that don't receive benefit from the springs, shocks, and struts. In other words, all those components that float up and down to go through those bumps, potholes, and all the undulations in the road to give you a good ride on that vehicle. That unsprung weight, if you can reduce it, it'll improve the handling of your car. On the G35, for example, upper control arm, knuckle, both lower control arms, all made of aluminum. Now just roll the clock back even 10 or 12 model years, and a typical knuckle on a car would be made of cast iron. The control arms in most cases were made of steel, and in most cases these components would weigh roughly double what they do on today's car. When you take all that weight out of the suspension, that unsprung weight, all of a sudden the car's got a much more smooth and supple ride. Perfect analogy, you know, go out in a muddy field and get your boots all clotted up with mud and then try and walk. You add that weight to the bottom of your legs, it's really hard to move and walk. And same thing for the car. You add a lot of weight to the suspension and it feels like it's got shoes made of stone, right? So the manufacturers have taken all this weight out and really improved the ride and handling. One more thing I want to talk about on the G35. We were just doing brakes on this car yesterday, and here's another neat feature that you'll see on late model cars like the G35. They've added a little spring to the brake pads to bring the brake pads off the rotor when you release the brakes. Reduces the drag when you're not on the brakes, and it improves the brake pad wear because it just slackens the pad off the rotor a little bit and prevents some of that leading edge wear that you tend to get on a brake pad. Usually when we look at older cars that didn't have this feature, we'll notice the leading edge of the brake pad is more worn than the trailing edge. It actually gets into a little wedge shape by the end of its life. That little spring that they've added right there, you can see it working, cures all that. Simple little fix, but one of the examples that manufacturers are doing to improve the breed all the time. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardiner for Motoring 2008.
At first glance, this vehicle looks a lot like General Motors' popular Equinox, and it is, but this one comes with a price tag of $500,000 and offers a look into the future.
What makes this vehicle different is that this vehicle is powered with fuel cell technology. So this vehicle produces no emissions. It does not have a gasoline internal combustion engine, but it gets its motive power using fuel cell technology. Well, what we're looking at here is a fuel cell, and very simply, hydrogen brought on one side of the stack, oxygen on the other side of the fuel cell stack. In the presence of the special membrane, does produce electricity. This electricity drives the electric motor. If you needed additional power, there is some additional power stored in a nickel metal hydride battery. So really, a fuel cell is nothing more than a battery on demand. It produces electricity as you provide oxygen and as you provide hydrogen, with the only byproduct being water and some waste heat. This represents one of 100 vehicles that we have out there on the road in the hands of average consumers, giving us daily feedback on how this technology handles in everyday use by families and businesses. They're saying it is fun to drive, it is amazingly quiet, and the performance is there. So the compromise is really in the area of range. That's kind of one of the areas that we're continuing to work on. Cannot complain. This vehicle has 320 kilometers worth of range, but one of the challenges is ensuring that there's a sufficient of a hydrogen infrastructure in the area where you drive, such that you can fuel up your vehicle with hydrogen. What you'll see is filling stations not a whole lot different than your gasoline filling station of today, but instead of filling up with liquid fuel, you're filling up with compressed hydrogen using a mechanical connection that hooks up to a port that's in the fill door that you're used to filling your vehicle with. Well, in terms of performance, this vehicle does 0 to 100 kilometers in 12 seconds, can reach a top speed up to 160 kilometers, 320 kilometers worth of range, and an amazing drive quality and idle quality. This represents where we think the automobile is going to end up when it's all said and done. Taking the vehicle out of the emissions debate is our vision, and so we are developing all sorts of technology to do just that. And this particular vehicle demonstrates that we can put a vehicle in the hands of a consumer where there is no emissions. Certainly we see this technology being viable by 2015 without really pushing the envelope too hard.
Closed captioning of Motoring 2008 is brought to you by the all-new 2009 Pontiac Vibe for the drive of your life.
Now, I yield to nobody in my distaste over SUVs. I call them stupid, useless vehicles. Nothing burns me more than seeing some socialite driving precious little Brittany to her private school in a 7,000-pound, 4-mile-per-gallon SUV. Come on, lady, buy a smart car. You can afford to be economical. But you know, I have a confession to make. I used to own an SUV. Yeah, for about 10 years I drove a Suburban. That was a diesel-powered Suburban, so it was relatively fuel efficient by the standards of the breed. But I had 4 kids. I had no choice. I needed to haul them around. And the other day, Brad and the boys were out shooting a Bill Gardiner segment, And a viewer pulled up in his big old Chevy Tahoe and pointed out that somebody had glued a poster to his windshield complaining about him driving a gas guzzler, he should save the planet, blah, blah, blah. But he pointed out, Brad, I need this vehicle. I got a couple of kids, I tow my trailer, I got my dogs, I need a vehicle like this. And you don't think he doesn't know he drives a gas guzzler? He's putting $120 worth of fuel in this thing every couple of days, but it's what he needs. It's a free country. He's got that right. Because that's how our system works. People offer products and services at a given price. Other people decide to buy or not to buy at that price. The will of society, as reflected through our government, can nudge that demand one way or the other. You don't think gasoline is taxed pretty highly as it is? Maybe it should be higher, but that's how the system works. Now, in the case of this particular chap, each time he goes to buy a newer SUV, it's going to be better than the one he had before. We're getting more diesels, we're getting displacement on demand, and most recently, the new Chevy Tahoe Hybrid was chosen as the best new engineered vehicle by an engineering magazine, so progress is being made for the people who need that type of vehicle. For people that maybe don't need that type of vehicle, well, the price of gas is going up, the demand is going down. So the system works. And what the system doesn't need is a bunch of environmental weenie vigilantes defacing private property and then running away and hiding behind their 72 Volvo station wagons, which probably don't get as good fuel consumption as that Tahoe. And oh, by the way, next time you environmental folks are going off to a conference in Bali someplace and are flying there on a jet plane, don't come talking to me about SUVs. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, the crews are getting ready for the start of the 2008 12 Hours at Sebring. And you know, as we mentioned earlier, Porsche's first endurance race was here at Sebring in 1960 in the RS60 Spyder. And they're hoping that now that they're coming out with a tribute to that vehicle with a new limited Boxster, that maybe, just maybe, it's an omen of things to come. We'll soon find out. That's it for now. We'll see you next time as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
On the positive side, they do have a cylinder deactivation system in this engine, which is going to give you about 7% more in terms of fuel economy, which is not a huge number, but between what the vehicle has gained in weight and size and that, it's pretty much a wash in terms of the new Pilot over the old Pilot.
Motoring 2008 on TSN has been brought to you by the new Q horsepower from Quaker State. Unleash all your horses. And Michelin, a better way forward.